Um, Thank you. It's really, we're going to start, and if that's okay, we're going to start, and we're going to try to end in time today, because we have so much going on today. It's really wonderful to see you here back. Thank you for joining us. I know there are a number of people watching us online as well. It's really lovely to know that there are people online too. And I presume there's maybe a couple of more people who are going to be joining us, but we're going to start promptly, and we're going to continue with what we've started to do, which frankly is one of the most exciting things for me. I'm so grateful to be able to do this with you. I'm just so happy Oh, thank you, Maida. I'm just so happy to be able to do this. We are going to start with a review, as we have always done, and we're going to continue today on the theme of the Shema. And we're going to continue on the theme of the Shema because it is so central to our identity. It is so central to who we are and why we are who we are, and how it is that we understand ourselves. And toward the end of the session, I'm going to ask us to look at our prayer books. And this is the reason I've asked you to take prayer books. So we're going to look at some Hebrew Bible. Though we are going to look at a limited amount of Hebrew Bible, if we had more time, we would look at more Hebrew Bible today. There's a great deal more to look at. And then we're going to look at our prayer books. So let's start, and let's start with a little bit of a review. So again, I'm going to do this very quickly. These are just the core questions, and I want to remind everyone, when we think about prayer, when we think about what it is that we are learning here in this segment about the Shema, I'm going to especially ask you to look at question number 5. What does it tell us about us and about our culture and about where this comes from? And what does it therefore tell us about Jewish prayer, which is question number 2. This is the only reason I'm putting this up there. And I would like to continue with a short review of just explaining to us where we've been and where we're going in this journey of study about prayer and identity and history and values. We started with the notion of biblical prayer and the different types of biblical prayer and the diversity of prayer experiences in the Hebrew Bible. We continued with the morning blessings, and the morning blessings as preparation for prayer. Not the prayer itself, but preparation for prayer. Allowing ourselves to get into the mindset that will enable us to pray. And what it means for us to get to a point where we can say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. In other words, what does it mean to enter into that space wherein we can engage with words of Torah? So we spoke a little bit about that, and then we started going into the historical introduction of the Shema. And we started to speak about that. We started last time, and we're going to continue this time. And we're going to continue this time in a way that will build on what we have done last time. So let me start with the very end of where we were last time and move forward in this respect now and move on to a more literary analysis as opposed to a historical analysis of the Shema and what the Shema means. Okay? Let's try to do that. You know what? I may close the doors so that we don't. So thank you. I appreciate this, so that we don't hear the noise of the children emerging out of their classes. Here is where we ended last time. 2 Kings chapters 18 and 19 describe not only the destruction of Samaria and the complete destruction of the kingdom of Israel, which was a larger kingdom than Judah, I remind everyone, more powerful, more economically vibrant, more connected than the kingdom of Judah, and was completely destroyed by the Assyrians after a 3-year siege of the city of Samaria, the capital city of the kingdom of Israel. This is 721 before the Common Era, the year 721 before Common Era. 2 Kings 18:19, beyond the fall of Samaria, speaks about the armies of the Assyrians marching upon Judah, conquering city after city in Judah until they reach Jerusalem. Now, the king of Judah is no longer in any meaningful way a king of the kingdom of Judah. He is now the king of Jerusalem. There is nothing left of the kingdom of Judah. The kingdom of Judah is completely overrun, and the Assyrian armies are going to create a siege of Jerusalem. And like all these other cities in Judah and in the kingdom of Israel and in so many other places around the Levant, around the Middle East, Jerusalem is about to fall to the overwhelming power of the Assyrians. And we looked at the speech of Rav Shakeh and the armies of Sanche. We looked into all of that, into how it was all set up. We looked into that and the miraculous survival of Jerusalem. To this day, we don't understand how Jerusalem survived. Why it was that the Assyrian armies withdrew. But they withdrew. And Jerusalem somehow survives. Right? And with Jerusalem's survival, we see the rise of a cult of the God of Jerusalem, protecting Jerusalem. The God of Jerusalem who's, as it were, housed in the house of God, right? And the mere survival of Jerusalem creates an enormous boost for this Judean religion and the religion of the God of Jerusalem, who now protects Jerusalem, right? As opposed to the Israelites, the kingdom of Israel, that's completely destroyed. And we see that coming up, right? Jerusalem is surviving, and God's protection of it becomes the explanation for how Jerusalem survived. And then we looked into Esarhaddon's succession treaties, and we noticed that Esarhaddon's name is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 19. He is acknowledged as the incoming emperor of Assyria in 2 Kings chapter 19, and we started looking into his succession treaties. And then we looked into those treaties in the context of their influence on the writing of Deuteronomy and the ideas that occur in the Shema. That was what we did last time. Does this sound familiar? Does this, yes? I'm just reviewing this very briefly, but by now, this should sound familiar, right? Now, let's talk about what it was that we saw and how it was that we saw it, because that's going to be the foundation of what we speak about today. Now, remember, the backdrop to this is that Jerusalem is conquered by the Babylonians. The house of God, the temple, is destroyed, and the Judeans are exiled. But that occurs in 587 before the Common Era, right? So the siege of Jerusalem occurs in the early 8th century, at the turn of the 8th century before the Common Era, 701, 702. The siege of Jerusalem, it's only 125 years later that Jerusalem is destroyed. Okay? 113 years later that Jerusalem is destroyed. Yes? So there's a period of time here wherein Judean culture evolves in the way that we understand it. This is where we are. Let's take a look at what we saw last time. Okay, we saw that. We're going to move forward. Here are the elements that we looked at from the treaty, the succession treaty of Esarhaddon, which amounts to a pledge of allegiance, on the basis of which so much of Deuteronomy was written, including ideas that find their way into the Shema. The notion of love the emperor God, right? And love the emperor God as one does oneself. The notion of relating these things to one's children and grandchildren and future generations, and all kinds of other notions, including, right, speaking about these things and protecting the emperor God, both in town and in the country, when you're in the house and you're walking about, when you're in your place, when you're within your boundary and you're beyond your boundary, right? And the notion that these texts are in our presence, the commandment of the emperor to keep the text of the treaty in the palace, keep it in your presence, make sure that you have it the way we do with the mezuzah, the way we do with the notion of these teachings remaining in our presence in the book of Deuteronomy and in the Shema. All of these ideas are ideas that make their way into our consciousness. And by the way, many of these ideas are not unique to this particular treaty of succession of Esarhaddon. They occur in other treaties that were used by other emperors and other empires throughout the ancient Near East, going back to the second millennium before the Common Era. But this time, they enter into our literature. This particular set of treaties, and we know that Menashe, the king of Judah, was among the vassals who had to sign this treaty for the emperor of Assyria. And now it impacts our religious culture. And we and a number of scholars have written about this, and we saw some of this last time, and this was where we got to. This is where we are. This is our starting point this time around. Yes? Are you with me? Have I not lost you yet? Are you? Yes? Is this okay? We're okay. So this is our starting point. Now we got to the Shema. And we started talking about the comparison between this and the Shema. And we started understanding that the Shema and the Ve'ahavta that we read out of chapter 6 of the book of Deuteronomy are effectively a Judean, Jewish pledge of allegiance. They're a pledge of allegiance to a kind of God sovereign. And we're going to talk about this today. We're going to talk about this Pledge of Allegiance today and what that Pledge of Allegiance really means in the context of our Deuteronomic writing. We're going to try to understand how it functions, this Pledge of Allegiance. Because remember that it originates in the writing of emperors with regard to their running of empires. It starts out from political documents. Maud, did you raise your hand? You don't want to say anything? No, okay. So it starts out with political writings. It starts out with the writings of emperors. We're going to figure out what this means and what kind of sense we make of it in the context of our Shema. So we're going to read parts of Deuteronomic writings, including parts of the Shema, that are not part of the Reform tradition, but that are part of traditional Judaism. And for this, I'm going to ask you to join me and to read with me in our Hebrew Bibles, okay? And then we're going to go to the prayer book. Afterwards, we're going to go to the prayer book, okay? So here we go. Following this introduction, here we go. Yeah.
These emperors were considered gods.
Very good. So I'm going to repeat the question for the sake of the people at home. The emperors that we're talking about, these Babylonian emperors, these Assyrian emperors, these Hittite emperors, Egyptian pharaohs transcended the line somehow between human and God, between humanity and divinity. Some of them knew that they weren't gods, but were representatives of God on earth. Some of them really thought of themselves, perhaps, as gods, right? But there is something here that transcends the line between divinity and humanity, right? At the same time, they wielded power. They were in control of governments. They raised taxes. They had armies, right? They lived very much political lives, right? But they also were somehow representatives of divinity. And the boundary between them as human beings and divinities is not always clear. And there's a huge debate about to what degree they're human beings, to what degree they're gods, right? Now, we're looking into something else right now. Yes.
But you can say that you can trace it the same tradition as the first kings of Israel. They were appointed or chosen through the priest by God.
Michael, I'm going to repeat the question again for the sake of people at home. Michael is saying, wait a minute, the early kings of Israel, Saul and David and Solomon and Rehoboam and so on and so forth, all of these kings of Israel, the kings of Israel are identified by the prophets of God and anointed, and they are God's chosen kings for Israel and Judah. In other words, here again, there is a kind of blurriness of the line between their being humans and their being representatives of God. In our Hebrew Bible, and I don't know how these kings saw themselves, but in our Hebrew Bible, the answer is there is no confusion. They are appointed by God, they are identified by God, but they are fully human. They are completely human, and they fail like human beings. They succeed like human beings, and they fail like human beings. Each and every one of them. There is no confusion, right? So, you know, the ancient Near Eastern emperor Shamash, right, names himself after a god. Hammurabi thinks of himself like the representative of God and a semi-divinity. A number of these other emperors, including perhaps Ashurbanipal, thinks of himself as some kind of the amount of power these human beings wielded is difficult to comprehend for us. Those emperors that were in control of the largest empires the world had ever known, of empires that were too far to travel. That kind of power is difficult for us to comprehend. It is difficult for us to understand. It really, you know, so there is a distinction, and the distinction is that in our literature, our kings are seen as fully and only human. Okay, let's move on and Helga. The Judean, Israelite, yes, the Israelite and Judean kings were seen as fully human. Yes? Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 11. Now, I don't know what page it's on. Do you know the page? 292? 292. Okay. And I would like to present this to you because the Shema in traditional Judaism is made up of 3 paragraphs. One which we know very well, Shema Yisrael, followed by the Ve'ahavta. Remember the Ve'ahavta, which is out of Deuteronomy chapter 6, the Torah portion of Va'etchanan. The following Torah portion, Ekev, chapter 11, contains the second paragraph of the Shema in traditional Judaism. there is then a third paragraph of the Shema, which is taken out of Numbers chapter 15, which I'm not going to study with you today because we don't have the time. But the second chapter of the Shema, the second paragraph of the Shema, is taken out of Deuteronomy chapter 11. And that too is influenced by the culture surrounding it. Now, let's take a look at what Deuteronomy chapter 11, the second paragraph of the Shema, read to this very day by traditional Jews every single day, the second of the three paragraphs. Let's see what it says, right? Let's take a look at this, right? In Hebrew, right? Here it is in English. If you obey the commandments that I enjoin you this day, loving your God, and it says Adonai, right? And serving God with all your heart and soul. See how it is that this is self-referential back to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Yes? The Ve'ahavta, right? See how all of this refers back to itself. I will grant that the rain for your land will fall in its season, the early rain and the late rain, and you shall gather in your new grain and wine. In other words, what does it mean? You will gather your new grain and wine. You will still have old grain and wine while you gather the new. In other words, plenty. There will be plenty for you. Everything will happen in its season. The dry season will happen in its season. The rain will come. The rain will end. The harvest will flow. There will be plenty of food, right? You will be able to gather in new grain and wine. Grain is great because from grain we make bread. Grain is the basic food stuff that we eat, but wine is a luxury product. Not only grain, you will have oil, you will have wine. Really extraordinary. There's wine too. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. There will be no hunger. You will eat your fill, right? And all you need to do is follow my commandments. All you need to do is follow the rules, and everything will be great. There will be no climate change. Right? There will be no storms. There will be no unpredictable things. Everything will be fine. Just do your part. Yes? Right? Yeah?
But that's a very dangerous road to go.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Helga says rightly, what a dangerous path to take. If you do this, I will do that, right? Yes? This kind of, yes? But the Shema represents a covenant. We're now entering into the covenant of the Shema, right? Yes? Okay. And now we're going to carry on. Take care not to be lured away and to serve other gods and bow to them. God's anger will flare up, it says. Ooh. Now, there is another side to this. You do your part, I, God, will do my part. The early rain will come in its season. The late rain will come in its season. The harvest will be plentiful. There will be grain. There will be wine. There will be grass for your cattle. Everything will be wonderful. But if you fail, if you do not follow my rules, look at what's going to happen. I will shut up the skies. There will be no rain. The ground will not yield its produce. You will soon perish from the good land that God assigns to you. In other words, you don't do your part. God will not do God's part. And what is going to happen? You're going to be thrown off the land. So there is an incentive, and there is a notion of covenant in the context of which there is a promise. And along with the promise, and we saw this last time in the Treaty of Succession of Esarhaddon, there are also threats. Here is what happens if you don't follow the rules. Yes? Now, what does this mean? If I am thrown off the land, or if the harvest fails, or if the rain doesn't come in time, and I know this, I've read this, I know this by heart, whose fault is it? What have I done? Why is the rain not coming? Oh, what have I done? Right?
Nothing, but your neighbor did something.
But maybe my neighbor, whom I don't like, and maybe other people, right? Right? Who knows? Who knows? Who did what that made the rain stop, that made the harvest fail? This is collective. This is part of the covenant, right? Yes? Yes, Margie.
I'm thinking this got deep in the psyche of ancient Jews, because I know the line, because of our sins we were exiled from the land. So
This is exactly right.
there.
It's absolutely there. It is absolutely there, right? Yes? And we could look into the ancient Near Eastern treaties and these pledges of allegiance and see this kind of thinking. And see the kind of thinking in the context of which you do your part, I will do my part, everything will be okay. You don't do your part, watch out. Okay? Yes? We see that. We see some of that happening, and we see that here. And we see that here with natural and political consequences. Right?
Rabbi, is it because they had no other way to explain it, so they took that blame? Or
That's a wonderful question. Helga is asking the question, is it because there was no other explanation? Was there no other explanation for why harvests failed? Or why the rain didn't come in its season? Or why things didn't work out? I think that the answer to that question is very layered and complicated, and it includes many parts. I am not willing to accept the assumption that the people who wrote this were simple-minded and that they didn't understand how layered and complicated the situations that they were living in were. They understood local politics, they understood national politics, they understood international politics, they understood the climate, they understood agriculture. These were not people who didn't understand the realities of life. They did understand the realities of life. And at the same time, what they experienced, I think, is a need to understand that there was a deity, there was a divinity, in the context of which there was some kind of a plan, and there was meaning in human life and in human action. That human life and human action and good human action would have good effect. In other words, that otherwise what they might be staring at was nihilism, was a lack of meaning and a lack of purpose. that would be deeply dangerous to their identity. This is a very brief response to what should be a much, much longer explanation that hopefully one day we're going to be able to engage in and talk about. But it's a wonderful, wonderful question. Marie.
So, in this context, are we just talking about the 10 Commandments?
No.
Okay.
No. By this time, we are not talking about the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments, Marie, is a great question. How these 10 Commandments are formulated, who formulates them, how do we understand the 10 Commandments and their place? You are right to ask the question. The 10 Commandments are in the second Torah portion of the book of Deuteronomy. They are both in Exodus and in Deuteronomy in Veit Hanan. This speaks about the covenant and not just the 10 Commandments, right? But excellent question, because the 10 Commandments are right there in the second Torah portion of the book of Deuteronomy. So, did you? No, yes.
I think the first line's interesting because it's so clear that people are worshiping other gods at the same time. That's one of the themes throughout the whole.
This is, we are somehow unable to control ourselves. Margie is saying the first line here indicates that people are worshiping other gods, that people are lured to worshiping other gods. Well, right? Yes.
Whatever the writers, however intelligent the writers of Deuteronomy were, who wrote it, they still have to explain it to a people who are not, to the average person. It seems like what we know as the writers of Deuteronomy, with, as you mentioned, with agriculture, with politics, that's not necessarily what the average person understands. So an explanation of why this is happening can be simplified for the average
So I'm going to repeat this yet again for the people at home, Ellen. Okay, so Ellen is saying, it's one thing to think about what the Deuteronomic writers and redactors know. It's another to try to understand how it is that they would communicate this to their constituency. And their constituency is not necessarily as sophisticated as they are. And I wonder what Ellen is thinking about. And they don't necessarily, perhaps, want to delve into the intricacies of all of these explanations. It's very true. And we can understand the covenant in different ways. This is very sophisticated literature. This is very sophisticated literature. Yes?
Seems to me this is the key for the priesthood to hold power. Because whatever happens, good or bad, they hold the key.
And here again, wonderful. Thank you. I'm just going to repeat this for the people at home. Is this not the key for the priesthood to hold power? Because they hold the keys to this text. They hold the keys to interpreting this text and to being able to tell people and to wield power over people, saying to them, oh, what have you done? That the rain didn't come in time, that your harvest failed. Wait a minute, let's take a look at this, right? They are the ones eventually holding power. Very good, very good. What we're identifying is that this is also a political document. Also a political document. Michael, yes, last one.
Yes, it's a political document, but very dangerous. Line thrown off the land. Therefore, you look around, it's Hebrew, Jews who were thrown off the land.
Yes.
That means the rest of the population of the land, which lives on ancestral land and never been thrown away, they're righteous and Jews are not.
Listen, the part of the danger of this, Michael is expressing an idea that we've expressed and that Helga has also expressed, but I think in a very clear way. What Michael is saying is the whole notion of just deserts. In other words, of people getting what they are, of people receiving the reward or the punishment that they deserve on the basis of their actions, is very dangerous. Because in the context of international politics, national politics, local politics, one person being thrown off their land as opposed to another person not being thrown off their land doesn't necessarily indicate one is guilty of something and the other is innocent. That one is a criminal and the other is righteous. The world doesn't work this way. 100% right. The world doesn't work this way. And we Jews and our history is testament to that. We know this. We know this in our bones. This is part of the second paragraph, and the ending of that paragraph goes back to the Ve'ahavta, goes back to chapter 6 of the book of Deuteronomy. We're still in chapter 11. Therefore, impress my words upon your very heart, bind them as a sign on your hand, let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Remember this from the Ve'ahavta? Yes? This is still the second paragraph of the Shema. We return to this in the context of this notion of covenant. Yes? That occurs in chapter 11. And recite all of these things when you're at home and when you're away, when you lie down and when you get up. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Right? This is a repetition, effectively, of the Ve'ahavta. We started with the love of God, right? We continued with covenant thinking. We returned to the references to Deuteronomy chapter 6. We returned to the very same thing. And then, so that, and here is the bottom line, to what end? What is the purpose of all of this? In the second paragraph of the Shema, so that you and your children may endure, you may survive, on the land that God swore to your ancestors to assign to them as long as there is a heaven on earth, that permanently you will be able to live on your land. This is, you will survive. Yes.
Have we taken away the parts that are not applicable, or do we continue to mouth these things that...
This is the second paragraph of the Shema, out of 3. I'm not going to go into the third one for lack of time. The third one is out of the book of Numbers, as I say. We're not going to go into the third one for lack of time, but I want you to see this, and I want you to understand the covenant thinking that's entailed in this. Now, let's go further. Let's go deeper here into that kind of covenant thinking. Okay? Let's go further into it. Okay. Deuteronomy chapter 7. Go back to Deuteronomy chapter 7. And take a look at what it says here in chapter 7, right? Know that only your God is the steadfast God. The only God who is steadfast is your God. The only God you can rely on is your God, who keeps the divine covenant faithfully to the 1000th generation. For those who love God and keep the divine commandments, and who instantly requites with destruction those who reject God, never slow with those who reject, but requiting them instantly. In other words, what is the image of this God? All-powerful, trustworthy God to the people who keep the covenant, as opposed to the people who reject the covenant or who fail. It's a trusting God for the allies and a punishing God for the enemies of God, for those people who reject the covenant. There is 2 sides to this throughout the book of Deuteronomy. This is our covenant. This is part of the nature of our covenant. We're going to talk about this in a moment in greater depth. Observe faithfully the instruction, the laws and the rules with which I charge you today. Right? Therefore, what am I saying to you? Both for the positive reasons and for the negative reasons, keep to the rules. Stick to the rules. This is all we're asking. Yes? You see how this is formulated? It is the biblical Deuteronomic way of seeing the world. This is the biblical Deuteronomic way of seeing the world. And this is within our Shema, right? And just one more example perhaps, right? Chapter 10, which is mirrored in the prophets. A magnificent passage in chapter 10. I don't know what page it's on. It's just a wonderful passage. Yes? I'm sorry, 291. Now, Israel, what does God ask of you? What does God ask of you? Right? To revere or fear your God, right? And walk only in divine paths, to love and to serve your God with all your heart and soul, keeping God's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you today for your good. Lema'an yitav lach, the Hebrew reads, right in chapter 10 there. For the heavens and their uttermost reaches belong to God, and earth and all that is on it. What do I ask? What are we asking? Just do your part. That's all we're asking, right? Because God is all-powerful. The emperor of Assyria isn't. God is all-powerful, right? Yes? Yes, Lynn.
What time period is this writing occurring?
Great question. This is probably occurring in the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era. The question that Lynn asked was, at what period, what historic period is this writing taking place? The 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era, right? This must be an explanation for the expulsion, for the destruction, right? So I think it probably came after, right? Yes, I think it probably came after the destruction. People saw the destruction of Israel. Afterwards, this was redacted in the 6th century, before the Common Era, after the destruction of Judah. But people had to experience destruction in order to try to explain it. If there were no destruction, if nothing was, everything was fine, there would be no need to write this. Right? You had to explain it somehow. Yeah, there had to be an explanation. Yes.
So what we're talking about now, if I understand this correctly, is sort of a historical perspective of what people thought was the relationship between themselves and God.
The relationship between themselves and God, and we are now going to really go into the relationship between people, between humanity and divinity, and this divinity of ours. It was, look at this, look at what chapter 10 says, right? You were chosen. Your ancestors were chosen. We are chosen people, right? And therefore, remove the excess layers from your heart. Remove the foreskin from your, circumcise the foreskin of your heart. The Deuteronomic writer says. Finally, open up your heart and get the message. Please, right? That your God is the God of all gods and the master of all masters, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God who shows no favor, and so on. Right? Do you understand what? You understand how the Deuteronomic writer is pleading with people. Pay attention. Pay attention. Yes? There is good and there is a threat, and pay attention. Yes?
But it's asking impossible from the people.
It's asking, Zoya is saying, it is asking for something no one can live by. This is impossible. The demands are impossible. Can you drive 55 miles per hour on the highway? Yes, you can set, you can set your speed control your cruise control to 55 miles per hour and drive 55 miles per hour on the highway. This you can do. Can you stop at a stop sign? Yes, you can stop it. Can you stop at a red light? Yes, you can stop. Can you live by this? Much more complicated, right? It's a setup for failure. It's a setup for failure, yes.
But isn't it that trade-off? Jews blame themselves for everything. In the one hand, they survive because of that trade-off. On the one hand, they blame themselves for everything, not Babylonians and not Assyrians, etc. On the other hand, they do survive, and the other nation, they don't survive. Isn't it the trade-off which keep us?
So this is amazing, because Alex is getting to the point of what it is that we're talking about. What at the end of the day is this about? It's about survival. Where are the Hittites? Where are the Assyrians? The Babylonians? Where are they? Where are these great empires? And we are here. Now, there is something here about the setup for failure in the context of which we don't live up to the covenant. And at the same time, the notion that the covenant survives and that we survive as part of the covenant. So we're not going to lose sight of that for a moment. We're not going to lose sight of that. But we're going to look at this for a second. And I'm going to ask you, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. Now that we have seen this, we have understood what the covenant is in the traditional and rabbinic understanding of the Shema, in the context of all the paragraphs of the Shema. What is this love of God? What is Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha? B'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha. What is this love of God? Is this an emotional love that we feel for God? Or is this a sense of love that is accompanied by a threat? In other words, an allegiance, a loyalty to God, because if we're not loyal, we know what's going to happen. We know what would happen if we weren't loyal to the emperor of Assyria, when the emperor of Assyria was in power.
But it says yet.
What is this love? What is this love? Is this a political love? Is this a national love? Is this some kind of a collective love? Is this allegiance, or is this love the way I love my children, the way I love my wife, the way I... What kind of love are we talking about? What is this love? What do we understand by this love? I'm sorry? Is this love with fear? Love out of fear? Or high moral standard? Is it a high moral standard? It's elevating ourselves to what our ideal should be in the context of the covenant. What is this love that we're talking about? Because it does say, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. It uses the word love. Now, don't tell me the ancients didn't understand the word love. They knew what love was. We are here. They understood love, right? What was this love? And what is this kind of love that is a love that is accompanied with this kind of threat? Or I'm going to ask it differently. Lynn, I'll be right with you. I'm going to ask it differently. What is this love that is accompanied with a sense, I'm not going to use threat, I'm going to use the word discipline. Boundaries, conditioning, and certain conditions, and the notion of the parent, or in other words, the unequal relationship within the covenant. And can there be love in a covenant wherein the relationship is unequal. Do we not experience love in relationships that are inherently unequal and beyond marriages and relationships between adults, parents and children? Parents and children. And is there such a thing as love between parent and children with no boundaries, no rules, no limitations? Everything is all rainbows and unicorns. Everything is wonderful. Right? Yes? I mean, do you understand what I'm at? Right? Is there, let's talk about that love, right? Let's talk about that connection. Let's talk about that attachment for a moment. Yes, Candy?
Don't you think it's an ideal, it's idealistic and something to strive for? And just like you can never drive exactly the speed limit if you don't use technology, then it might be something we can never quite achieve, but we should keep trying to do.
This is what Zoya was saying. This is the ideal. This is what we strive for. This is us raising ourselves to this higher moral standard, right? The notion is this is what we ought to live up to, right, Candy? This is what you're saying. This is what we ought to live up to. I'll be right with you, Margie. Yes, Maida?
I keep hearing the people in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen saying, what did you do?
Maida, you're asking a question here. Maida was asking a question about the Holocaust, and you're asking about how do we explain, and how did people explain this to themselves? This is inexplicable, and I certainly have no answer for it. I absolutely have no answer for it, right? So I understand what you're asking. I understand what you're asking. This is not something that I can respond to, and certainly not right now, right?
Because they couldn't.
Right. Right. So 2 last questions, one Lynn and then Margie. Margie, I see you. Lynn, yes.
Back to what we were talking about, is how we love of God. The last 2 words, commanded to experience. And that experience is the ideals that God is hoping that we will take into our hearts. And again, it relates to the morale or the moral of people, that to love a God or to love something that you can't see, and it's difficult, I would think, for human beings, unless you're following all the rules, like in the orthodoxy, then you are actually doing it out of fear at some point, I think. But anyways, not to go in a different direction. The love we experience is a love that we feel within ourselves, to other people, to our family, to our children, to nature, to the rabbis, to our synagogue. And this is how we feel the love of God, through our own experiences. And all relationships have boundaries, even those between parent and child.
Right.
And boundaries,
Right. So Lynn, I'm going to summarize what you said. And I'm going to summarize what you said by emphasizing the redemptive power of love. By emphasizing that there is a redemptive power that emanates from love of partners, love of children, love of others around, love of the environment, love of the natural world, right? That leads us to elevating our behavior and to living by this higher moral standard, right? Yes? I'm going to bear that in mind because we're going to go back to it in a moment, in one moment. Margie?
I'm just thinking about the very first line of the Shema, that it's commanding love before it's talking about obeying. It doesn't say you should obey your God. It says you should love your God.
In the
And it
Shema,
talks
right.
about heart, mind, what is it, with all your heart, with all your soul,
With all your might, right.
And so it's, the heart part sort of suggests a profound love that's different from the love of maybe your mind being terrified.
Right.
What's gonna happen.
So Margie's pointing out the role of the heart and of the word love and of the word heart and the emphasis on love and heart in the Shema in chapter 6 of Deuteronomy in our passage. And I want to just point out, Margie, just for us to know, the heart in the ancient Near East was also the site of the intellect. Right. So let's just remember that. It wasn't just, right? Now, open up to the Shema in your prayer books. Open up the Shema in your prayer books. Go to the Shema in your prayer books, in the Mishkan Tefillah, and tell me what is taking place in the Shema, in the context of our reading of the Shema, in our Reform prayer book. Page 34. 34 and on. 34 and then on, right? Into the following page, right? What does it say? What does it say? Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, right? It goes through Deuteronomy chapter 6, and then what? What happens after the Ve'ahavta? Yes, they eliminate this entire paragraph, and what do they go to? The very end of the third paragraph, which says, Leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai, so that you may remember and you may perform all of my commandments and be holy to your God. I am your God who took you out of the land of Egypt to become your God. I am Adonai, your God. This is the Shema in Reform Judaism. What have we done here in Reform Judaism with the Shema? Where is the covenant in Reform Judaism? Is it understood? It's deleted. It's hidden. It's sub rosa, right? What happened in Reform Judaism to the whole notion of the covenant, to the whole notion of where this Shema and the paragraphs that we're reading in the Shema came from? Where is it within Reform Judaism? What are we left with in the context of Reform Judaism? Love, positivity, commitment, no negative implications. No negative implications. Relationship. Not the boundaries, not the pain, not the punishment, not the discipline, the love. I'm sorry? Michael said liberalism, and this is your word, not mine. I like it. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to say that. It's your word, not mine. I appreciate it. What happened here with regard to Reform Judaism? What has this covenant become? An acceptance and a covenant of love. Now, not punishment. I'm sorry?
If you keep reading,
Yes.
there are hints of punishment. There are hints of,
In the Shema?
oh, not in the Shema, but in our prayer.
Oh, in our prayer book. Yes. In the Shema? No, in the Shema, no. Now, what is the magic of the Shema? And this is what I want to leave you with. The magic of the Shema is basically as follows, and I'm going to put it very simply and superficially, and we're going to start from that next time. And we're going to unpack it next time. The emperor of Assyria is very difficult to defeat, but is possible to defeat. The emperor of Babylon is very difficult to defeat, very powerful, but is possible to defeat. The emperor of Persia, the emperor of Greece, the emperor of Rome, all of these emperors are very difficult to defeat. They're very powerful, but they're possible to defeat. It is very, very difficult to defeat an unseen God. It is very difficult to defeat a God that doesn't have an army, that wields the kind of power against which tanks and artillery and missiles don't work. When we identify a divinity that holds power that is above earthly power, and we accept that divinity as holding both natural power and political power that gives rise to a covenant, that divinity becomes very difficult to defeat. To defeat. Who learns that lesson? Christianity. Christianity adopts the model of a divinity that is going to be impossible to defeat. When the Assyrian emperor is associated with divinity, when the Babylonian emperor is associated with divinity, when the Persian emperor is associated with divinity, and they are defeated, their divinity is defeated with them. When the covenant gives rise to a power wherein defeat and punishment are part of the equation and are part of the plan. When the whole of life is part of the covenant and of the plan, it's very difficult to defeat that divinity. And lo and behold, we are here, part of the very same covenant. I'll be right with you, Marie. What has Reform Judaism done? What has Reform Judaism done? Taken the fear and the discipline and the inequality in the relationship out of the covenant. Right? That's what's happened here, right? We are going to remove this second paragraph because the second paragraph is dangerous. That thinking is dangerous. And at the same time, that thinking remains part of our lives. We keep asking ourselves, why did this happen? What did I do? What did we do? And to a certain degree, even further, why is it that we deserve to be here? How did we survive? What has allowed us to be here as opposed to others who are not here? The writers of the book of Deuteronomy produced a covenant that would survive beyond empire. This covenant of the book of Deuteronomy that we looked at today in the context of the Shema is the foundation of the Jewish people. And it is the foundation of the Jewish people because it guaranteed our survival. And it guaranteed our survival because it explained everything and allowed God to survive as the all-powerful God sovereign of our lives. In this respect, what the Deuteronomic writer achieved is pure genius. And that was achieved in the context of the Shema, which we read every single day. And the love of the Shema is the core of the Shema, but doesn't tell the whole story. Our lives are about more than pure love. They are about pure love and the way our love interacts with the world. And that's not always straightforward. That's not always easy. Lynn, you had your hand up before. Yes? Marie?
Well, changing the covenant, because it didn't eliminate it, changing the covenant, the form of the covenant, doesn't mean that our actions aren't going to have any consequences. There still has to be some discipline. Does it mean we can do whatever we want and there's no, it's just...
It means that we are commanded to tell our children to think about God when we lie down and when we rise up, when we're in the house and when we're away, that we are supposed to love our God with all of our souls, with all of our strength, with all of our might, in other words, with all of our belongings, with everything that we can muster. But what are the consequences? Where are the consequences? Right? Yes? All of that has been removed. All of that has been taken away. Right? In other words, what is it that now we are doing with the Shema? We are turning the Shema into a matter of compulsion, of obligation, of deeply felt commitment on the part of each and every one of us that we trust is going to enable us to move forward. The discipline we will discover through our lives.
I don't know, as a parent, I told my kids their actions are going to have consequences, and now I'm wondering, did I screw up?
Can you imagine, Marie, I'm not going to repeat that question for the people at home. Can you imagine parenting without boundaries? Without any boundaries, without any discipline? I don't know. Yes.
But isn't what you suggest really the core of faith?
It is the core of faith. It is the core of faith. And the core of faith, thank you, Helga, and we will end with this. The core of faith is that human lives and human actions and human behaviors and human striving towards an ideal have meaning. And that in the end, whether we experience it or not, this will lead to goodness. And that faith in a goodness that we may not be able to see is the core of the covenant. And that is the covenant that armies cannot destroy. And that's why we are here. And the Deuteronomic author and redactor understood it. And this is the gift of Judean culture through Judaism. This is the core gift we have offered to the world. So now we understand it. Now we know. Thank you.